Um, right, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me okay at the back? Yeah, great. Hello to people on the stream as well. My name is James Walker. I'm one of the organisers of London Pattern Club, and that's kind of what this talk is about today, is about my journey of starting it and how it's changed, what kind of challenges have cropped up through the way. So I thought I'd just start by saying a little bit about myself and my sort of motivations for starting this group. If I can change that. Cool. So I sort of describe myself as a creative technologist, which really just means that I enjoy working with technology in creative ways. That's more of a hobby, and my actual job is as a product manager for a mobile app. So all of the stuff I'm about to describe now is not my job. This is very much like a passion project for me. I particularly enjoy working with sound and textiles and live coding interfaces like tidal cycles and Strudel, which I sort of first learned about in 2021. Kind of discovered that through the kind of Algorithmic scene in London, and then while it was the lockdown, I sort of learned tidal cycles through some of the tutorials that Alex had put together on YouTube, and that kind of opened up basically this whole world of how algorithms are cropping up in different ways in weaving and in knitting. So another thing that I'd started doing during lockdown was knitting, and I really enjoyed that just as a way to spend my time, and sort of through looking at the way that knitting patterns work and thinking about scripts in programming languages, I suddenly saw all these similarities that there were through things like knitting and weaving. And yeah, something that I quite like about live coded music is how often very simple patterns are combined for quite rhythmically interesting results. So simple things are kind of being transformed, and then the results of that are being transformed, and then through that you end up with these very complex patterns that have kind of grown out of very sort of humble origins. And that's something that I've noticed in knitting and when I'm working with sort of yarn and fiber crafts as well. Often they're quite simple patterns, but they're alternated and they're combined in ways that produce very visually interesting outcomes. So with that in mind, when I first learned about Sheffield Pattern Club, I was really intrigued because I really liked this idea that there's something in common between computing and crafting, which is like the use of algorithms and this focus on patterns. So I think this was around 2023, and I got in touch with Alex, Lucy, and Ray shortly after they began organizing their workshops, and I asked about setting up a similar group in London. And they were very encouraging about it, and they gave me their permission, even though I'd never run or organized any sort of community event in my life. So I decided to set up London Pattern Club, which is heavily inspired by Sheffield Pattern Club. And I usually describe it as a craft group and a social space for people who are interested in algorithmic creative practices. And by algorithmic creative practices, I mean some of the things I've described, like live coding, knitting, weaving, drawing Kolan patterns, all sorts of things that involve the use of patterns. But I try not to give a very fixed definition of it, because I like it to be sort of open to interpretation, because I like this kind of process of discovering always that there are algorithms nested within other things. So the really important thing for me is just that it offers a space for people from different disciplines to meet and see what they have in common and share ideas. So just in terms of our timeline, around 2023 I was living in southeast London, and a new event space had opened called Set Social, which is in Peckham. And at the time they were looking for groups to use their community space. So I messaged them with this idea about a series of workshops that would combine crafting and creative coding. And in those workshops, I think there were maybe 4 of them that I ran each week. We looked at things like kumihimo braiding, creating art with processing, making music with Strudel. But these workshops, they basically required quite a lot of prep on my hand. And one thing I noticed was that people who came to the workshops really enjoyed the more hands-on craft activities. So like there was one where most of the workshop was just making these very low-cost kind of looms out of cardboard and just teaching people the basic principles of weaving. And I felt like people actually enjoyed that more than the kind of taught, the more sort of programming aspects of it. So that was kind of one facet in making me want to shift it from a more creative coding focused thing to a more of a craft focused thing. Another factor was that within even just Southeast London alone, there are a lot of different groups that are already covering creative coding. Like we have live coding, like algorithms events that Dan puts on. There's creative coding craft space, there's a creative coding book club. So basically it's very well represented in London, and I didn't feel like I had to repeat what other people were already doing. So that kind of prompted this shift towards really just focusing on crafts. And I really wasn't aware of any other groups that were like craft groups, but thinking about programming and thinking about algorithmic creative practices. So that was kind of my motivation for how it's changed a little bit since then. After those workshops at Set Social, I sort of just ran a craft group at the Ivy House, which is not far away. And then in 2024 moved to a different space called The Glitch, which is in Waterloo. And that was for a couple of reasons. One was that it was just a bit easier for people to get to because it's a bit more centrally located. Another thing is that they have a kind of, at the time they had a workshop space in their basement, and it just meant that we could both have a craft group and then occasionally run workshops about things like strudel or processing. And then this year we started doing events at the Peckham Pelican, which is opposite one of the University of the Arts London campuses. And that's been quite good because there's quite a lot of crossover between, in terms of interests, like a lot of people from UAL are quite interested in our group. And Marissa, who kind of co-organizes with me, is a lecturer at the UAL. So that was kind of what prompted the move to that venue. So I'm going to name drop a load of different people in loads of different groups now, because I think the most interesting and fruitful part of organizing this for me has been like coming into contact with different groups, and just to like highlight a few of them. One of them is London Lace Club, who are a fantastic group that teach bobbin lace making. I think they do their event, it's bi-weekly, and it's in North London. But yeah, bobbin lace is fantastic. Like if you want to, if you're thinking about like algorithmic crafts, it's really like, you know, the pinnacle of it. And they collaborated with us to do a workshop, which went really, really well. It was one of the highlights of it. So also Peckham Digital, who run a yearly festival, sort of creative computing festival. And we're going to be collaborating with them in about a week's time for an event at the V&A that I'm talking about in a sec. Another highlight, working with artists and designers. One of those is Emil Woodenberg, who looks at essentially like building your own website, trying to move away from platforms like Wix and Squarespace, and trying to essentially like take back control of your own data. So Emil kindly ran a workshop with us that was focused on like trying to show how you could build a website for yourself using very, very simple tools. And that was like a little bit of a departure from the kind of algorithmic creative practice theme, but I felt like it was a very relevant thing to be sharing with people. Another artist is Sophie Nadel, who works a lot with machine knitting. And Sophie came to one of our craft groups, and Sophie's been working a lot with using machine learning and knitting, and using machine learning to create knitting patterns. And Sophie's got a book coming out it's in a few weeks' time actually, but talking about that process of yeah, machine learning, generating knitting patterns, and yeah, I interviewed them for that book. So that was like a very fruitful kind of collaboration that came out of running this. In terms of academic networks, so there's the Material Programming Research Group that's based at UAL and I think Chelsea College of Art, which is run mainly by Agnes Cameron and works a lot with, essentially Agnes runs a book club called the Knit Tech Reading Group, which I would encourage everybody to look up and join because it's very open and anyone can attend. But it's looking at thinking a bit more about the technology of machine knitting and the way that the knitting machines are designed and what knitting actually is, and kind of getting into these philosophical conversations about it. So both me and Marissa are a part of that. And another group is the Unstable Design Lab, who are based in University of Boulder, Colorado. And they produce an amazing open source software called AdaCAD, which helps you, it's like a node-based visual programming tool, but for making binary patterns and specifically for e-textiles. So that's a really nice design tool that I've also contributed to. And the other fact is like publishers, working with publishers. So one of those is HoloBiont, and they produced a magazine recently called Soft Issues, which was looking at the idea of softness. And one of the things, so I wrote a bit about London Pattern Club as an article for that, and talking a bit about how I wanted to, talking a bit about the ethos of it and the motivations behind it. And then another publisher is Emma Crabtree, who writes a yarn and fiber publication, who is publishing Sophie's book, which is the one on the right. So without organizing this group, I wouldn't really have come into contact with all of these different with this network of people. And I think there's a very, very rich network of individuals who are working on like similar themes, not just in London, but essentially the main challenge is, as I guess what I'm thinking about is how can I, rather than reproducing what lots of other groups do, but how can I work in collaboration with different groups, and how can we kind of work together? So one of the challenges has been balancing organizing this with my other responsibilities, because obviously I have a job, and I was doing a degree this year as well. So both Marissa and I are quite busy, and it's meant that I haven't really been able to organize our monthly craft groups as often as I would like. So that's one challenge, is just time. Another issue is funding. The way that our sort of funding model works is we advertise our events on Luma, and we allow people to give us donations for those events, and those donations go onto an account on Open Collective, which is like a transparent budgeting tool, and then we just use that to pay for materials, promotional things. So that's our kind of funding model at the moment. But I think to do things that are a bit more ambitious, like inviting guests, doing events, running workshops, then we would need more of a kind of reliable funding stream. So I think my next job will be to like look at funding applications or think about ways to find grants so that we can continue doing what we do. In terms of the next steps, as I mentioned, we've got an event in collaboration with Peckham Digital next weekend at the V&A, which I think is going to be really fun. It's going to be around like making low-cost e-textile sensors that you can use to make music. And we're going to be planning events for 2026 as well. Something else I have in mind is like a booklet of algorithmic craft things that people can do that perhaps like people can take away from the craft group. So those are kind of what I have in mind at the moment. And I wanted to kind of close by like posing a bit of a prompt to the audience, which is like, what do you think makes a volunteer-run group sustainable? You don't necessarily have to answer this, but I think it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, is whether these challenges that I've highlighted are actually challenges, whether we do actually need more funding, whether Pattern Club needs to be more than what it is at the moment. Yeah, if anybody has thoughts on that, I'd be quite interested to hear it, but also practical advice about how to meet some of the challenges that we have. And then, yeah, any general questions as well, like happy to answer those. But thanks very much for listening. Yeah.
Thank you very much, James. My quick response to your discussion would be a good committee to share the load. Don't worry about chasing funding all the time because that will suck up all your time rather than doing the project. Those are my two quick advice things. But is there anybody who has any questions or any further thoughts or want to contribute to James's question that he pointed out to us all? Yeah. Don't trip.
Many thanks for sharing. I was wondering, how do you, or what do you mean by ambitious, and how do you see that? Well, yeah, the definition of scaling and the ambitious meaning.
Yeah. So when I think of it, I think of events, maybe not quite on the scale of what's happening this weekend in Sheffield, but definitely being able to do more workshops, inviting other craftspeople in to teach what they're doing, running events or having collaborative music performances, things that combine textiles and creative coding. So essentially just a little step beyond our craft group, which is just something that kind of happens once a month and people will come along and chat, which is really lovely and I want to continue doing, but I also feel like I'm not doing justice to the theme and the potential of what we could be doing. So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, that's what I have in mind.
Anything else? Yep, one over here.
Hey, hello. Thanks very much for that. I think, I really like this as a big prompt about how to organize around all of these activities. So that's thanks very much. And I think me and Daniel were just whispering to each other that I think one of the things I've noticed work really well with the London live coding community is that there's a really blurry divide between who's an organizer and who's an attendee, and I think that's worked really well. So I would actually, challenge a little bit the idea about having a committee. I think there's definitely benefits to that, but one of the things that's worked really well is having guest hosts of the live coding meetups, and to really set the tone that anyone can get involved. And I'm curious about what you think about that. About have you asked for help from people in the community, and how's that gone? And do you have any tips around that too?
Yeah. So that's a great question. When I've kind of lent on other people and organisers, like London Lace Club, for example. I sort of approached them and said, would you like to just do what you ordinarily do, but we'll kind of make it a collaborative event. So I was really just taking care of getting the space booked and organising it while they did the actual, I took a back seat and then they were running the actual event. And that worked really well, I think. So that's I think something I'd like to do a bit more is just inviting people and being we'll host you, just to take a bit of the burden off of myself. But also, I think there's the question of money, and I know that's something that you guys have been thinking about as well, where it gets quite complicated because, I think people deserve to be paid for their time. Often we're only just breaking even if we're talking about donations and charging for this group. So it's kind of a tricky one, is where do you just managing that. I don't know how to word it, but is where it gets a bit complicated for me. Yeah.
Maybe one final question or comment all the way at the back.
Hi. So I'm going to say the maybe unpopular thing and say you got to make money. It's got to be a business. I mean, I think there was an era in London when we had a bunch of workshops that came out of like kind of anarchisty, whatever-y software developy organizations like Open Lab. There's at least 3 or 4. There was MizTech, Code Design, and we all kind of ran it like, I'm not going to say like capital B business. Like we weren't charging like, I mean, some people charge insane amounts of money. Like there's the Microsoft funded ones that give you a degree at the end and all that. But it was like 15 to sometimes even like 40 pounds for like, you know, workshops, multiple workshops, sometimes up to like 100 for like if we were going to do like, you know, a 6 workshop block. But it was good because you get some money up front. If it's a number of weeks, you get some money, you can have a space, you can book someone. I mean, you kind of need to get some money to do some things, and you can make a surprising amount. People really want to like give not that much money up front in order to have like a good experience, and if someone good's going to come in, they know it's for like the community. But it takes a ton of work. I mean, it was, for me, it was like kind of, I didn't really have much of a job at the time, and I was part-time lecturing, so something I could do, and I promoted it, and I did the mailing list, and I did the funds, and I ran into trouble with the funding because, you know, I'm actually a dual citizen, and I realized I can't take money anymore because the US laws actually suck like you not believe. So there's real implications in it, and it's like you're either donation level like you guys are at, where you're doing, I think you guys are doing pretty well, to be honest. But if you do make the jump, it is a business. That's my advice. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just saying I've done it for a bit. I do it at university now. You know, I pay people to come in, but, you know, the other thing I'll say, and I mean, by the way, I don't think it's daunting. Like, you can do it as a person. Like, it just takes work, and you just got to have a head for it and get a good accountant, like I have. That's it. I mean, people do stuff for cheap for you. But, you know, we have lots of really good organizations, and you guys could post more. I see that you guys interact, but I mean, like, there's also Dorkbot, I would say, which has been long dormant in London and really needs some people to help out, and like, there's space, and there's people involved in a big mailing list, and like, no one really takes advantage of that. Okay. So maybe talk to us about Dorkbot too.
Yeah, well. Yeah,
I apologize for all the London-centric stuff that I've just said to everyone here.
Me too, by the way. Like.
But, you know, yeah. Okay, cheers.
Did you want to respond?
Yeah, only to say, I think for me a big part of it is that I want our workshops to be like affordable and accessible, and sometimes I see people kind of, you know, they will advertise like hand weaving workshops, but they'll be like £140, which I just feel is, and you know, people go to those, but I think for me it's like I want it to be affordable, so it's kind of a balance between like making enough to justify or to sustain the group, but also not putting up like such a financial barrier to people that it can't be that they can't attend. So no, I think I totally understand what you're saying, but it's something where I have to kind of decide like what's a reasonable perhaps like tiers, maybe because I see lots of groups doing different tiers where it's like if you're waged or unwaged. Something like that comes to my mind, but yeah.
Thank you, James. Give everybody
you.
a round of applause.